Trumpets echoed across the central square of the Dravith capital, bouncing off towers of black glass and gold. Thousands of Dravith citizens packed the streets, waving banners stitched with the Empire's crest. Today marked 15 years since the Battle of the Solar Barrier, the day the Empire broke humanity's fleet and forced Earth to surrender. Every year the celebration grew larger, and this year, on the 15th anniversary, it had become something close to a national holiday. High above the square, on a balcony wrapped in silk banners, Emperor Threll watched the parade pass below. He wore a long coat lined with medals he had never earned in battle, medals given to him simply because he sat on the throne when the war ended. Beside him stood Grand Admiral Corin Voss, the man who had actually won the war, or so the history books claimed. Voss did not smile the way the crowd smiled. He watched the parade with the flat, careful eyes of a soldier who still remembered what real fighting looked like. "They love you today," Threll said, raising a glass of pale wine. 15 years, and the humans have not fired a single shot back. You crushed them completely. Voss inclined his head. "We crushed their fleet, Your Majesty. Their homeworld surrendered because it had no fleet left to protect it." "Same thing," Threll said, waving a hand. "Dead is dead. Broken is broken." Voss said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with the Emperor over small details never ended well, and today was not the day to start. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the giant screens hanging above the square, screens replaying old battle footage on a loop. Human ships burning, human ships fleeing, human ships going dark, one after another, until the recording ended with the image of the last surviving human battleship drifting, powerless, in the debris field near the solar barrier. The crowd cheered every time that final image appeared. Far from the capital, on the other side of the Empire's territory, the mood was much quieter. Earth itself sat under a permanent occupation fleet, its cities patrolled, its skies watched by drones that never slept. Humans still lived there, still worked, still raised children, but they did so under Dravith law, in Dravith-approved zones, with Dravith soldiers walking their streets. To the Empire, this was proof of total victory. A conquered world, quiet and obedient, exactly as a defeated enemy should be. But quiet does not always mean empty, and obedient does not always mean broken. Back in the capital, as the parade reached its loudest point, an alert blinked on a console deep inside the Deep Space Monitoring Center, several kilometers from the square. The center was a long, dim hall filled with rows of sensor stations, each one manned by a technician watching for threats that almost never came. Most of the staff had been given the day off to attend the celebration. Only a skeleton crew remained, half watching their screens, half listening to the parade sounds drifting in from outside. One young technician frowned at his console. A single line of data had appeared on his screen, then vanished. He blinked, thinking it was nothing, a flicker caused by solar interference or a faulty relay. He almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, he ran the numbers again, just to be sure. The signal had come from far outside normal Dravith patrol routes, from a sector of space the Empire had marked as dead decades ago, a region of broken asteroids and radiation called the Ashfall Belt. Nothing lived there. Nothing had ever lived there, not since long before the war with the humans even began. The Empire's own survey teams had confirmed it years ago. No atmosphere, no resources worth mining, no reason for anyone to go there. And yet the signal had come from exactly that place. A short burst, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but structured, patterned, unmistakably artificial. Not noise, not static, something made on purpose, by something with a mind. The technician sat very still for a moment, staring at the empty space where the data had been. Then he did what any careful worker would do. He logged the event, flagged it as unusual, and passed it up the chain, expecting nothing more to come of it. After all, what could possibly be sending signals from a dead field of rock, on the very day the Empire celebrated the total defeat of its only real enemy? Outside, the parade reached its final moment. Fireworks bloomed over the capital in gold and crimson, the colors of victory, and the crowd roared loud enough to shake the windows of the monitoring center. Emperor Threll raised his glass one more time, toasting 15 years of peace bought through conquest. Grand Admiral Voss raised his glass as well, though his eyes lingered, just for a second, on the report that had quietly landed on a tablet near his hand, a report about a strange signal from an empty sector of space. He read the first line, then the second. A small crease formed between his brows. And for the first time in 15 years, the war that the Empire believed was over had just quietly, carefully, begun again. 3 days after the anniversary parade, the streets of the Dravith capital still smelled faintly of fireworks smoke. Workers swept confetti out of the gutters. Banners sagged in the rain. The city moved slowly, tired from celebration, and most people had already stopped thinking about the strange little signal that had blinked on a console during the parade and then disappeared. Fleet Marshal Ines Dahl had not stopped thinking about it. She sat alone in a small office on the upper floor of the Deep Space Monitoring Center, long after her shift should have ended, staring at the same burst of data the young technician had flagged 3 days earlier. She had pulled every record she could find on the Ashfall Belt. Old survey reports, mining assessments, radiation maps. Every single document agreed on one thing. Nothing could survive there, and nothing ever had. And yet the signal was real. She had checked the raw sensor logs herself, cross-referenced them against 3 separate monitoring stations, and each one confirmed the same thing. A short, structured transmission, gone in less than 2 seconds, coming from deep inside a field of rock the Empire had written off decades ago. She brought her findings to her direct supervisor first, a heavy-set officer named Reeve, who cared more about his retirement plans than sensor anomalies. He listened for exactly as long as politeness required, then waved a hand. Old mining equipment, he said. Leftover automated beacons from before the Ashfall Belt was abandoned. They still power on sometimes, send a burst, then go quiet again. It happens more than you would think. There is no record of any mining equipment in that sector, Dahl said. I checked. Dahl did not move on. That night, instead of going home, she requested access to older archives, records from before the war had even started, hoping to find any mention of activity in the Ashfall Belt. Most of what she found was exactly what she expected, nothing. But buried in a decommissioned survey file, she found something strange. A note, dated years before the war, from a Dravith scout ship that had passed near the edge of the belt and reported unusual gravitational readings. Readings the ship's crew had dismissed as instrument error and never followed up on. Unusual gravitational readings. The kind large structures sometimes produce. Dahl leaned back in her chair, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. A single flagged signal could be explained away as noise. Old sensor errors could be dismissed as instrument mistakes. But 2 unrelated pieces of strange data, years apart, both pointing to the same dead sector of space, was harder to explain. She began drafting a formal report, one she planned to bring directly to Grand Admiral Voss himself, bypassing Reeve entirely. Far away, in a very different kind of room, Grace Whitfield studied a screen of her own. The room she stood in had none of the polish of the Dravith capital. Its walls were rough metal, patched in places, lit by strips of soft white light powered by generators built from salvaged parts. Around her, dozens of workers moved between rows of half-finished ship hulls, welding sparks flying, the low hum of machinery filling the air. This was the heart of the Ashfall Belt shipyard, hidden deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid, shielded from outside detection by layers of rock and careful engineering. Grace watched a readout scroll past on her console, confirming what she already suspected. Their test transmission, sent 3 days earlier during the anniversary celebration, had been detected. Not ignored. Detected. Dravith monitoring stations had picked it up, exactly as planned. Owen Marsh stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the same readout. He had aged since the solar barrier, gray now threading through his hair, but his eyes still held the same steady calm that had once made an entire fleet trust him with their lives. They noticed, Grace said quietly. Good, Owen said. That was the point. They spend that day convincing themselves the war is over, Owen said. I wanted them to feel it happen while they were still celebrating. Let it sit next to the fireworks in their memory. Grace studied him for a long moment. You know this changes the timeline. If they take it seriously, they will send someone to look. Sooner rather than later. I'm counting on it, Owen said. 15 years of hiding was never the plan, Grace. It was the first step. He turned away from the console, looking down the long rows of half-built ships stretching into the dark. They think they buried us. It's time they learned what actually grows in the dark. Behind them, the shipyard kept working, tireless and quiet, exactly as it had every day for 15 years. But something in the air had changed. The waiting was almost over, and both sides, though they did not yet know it, were about to find out exactly how much had grown in the silence since the solar barrier fell. 15 years earlier, before the parades and the medals, the war had looked very different. The Battle of the Solar Barrier began not as a single clash, but as a slow, grinding collapse. For 3 years, the human fleet had fought the Dravith Empire across a dozen systems, trading ground a little at a time, losing more ships than it could replace. Earth's shipyards worked around the clock, but Dravith's shipyards worked faster, backed by an empire 10 times the size of humanity's small collection of worlds. By the 3rd year, everyone in command knew the truth, even if nobody said it out loud in public. Humanity could not win a war of numbers. Owen Marsh had known it earlier than most. As commander of the 3rd Defense Fleet, he had watched the numbers fall for 2 years, watched good pilots die trying to hold lines that could not be held, watched Dravith ships pour through gaps in the defense faster than they could be sealed. When the final Dravith push toward the solar barrier began, most of the human command staff wanted to make a stand there, to throw everything they had left into one last battle and hope for a miracle. Owen argued against it in a command meeting 3 days before the battle, in a room full of tired officers who did not want to hear what he had to say. "If we fight here with everything we have," he said, standing at the head of a long table covered in star charts, "we lose the fleet completely. Every ship, every crew, and Earth is left with nothing standing between it and their entire war machine." "What is the alternative?" one of the other commanders snapped. "Surrender without a fight? Let them walk in." "No," Owen said. "We fight, but we fight to lose in a way that looks convincing, and we save what we can while we do it." The room had gone very quiet. Owen laid out the plan slowly, carefully, knowing how it would sound. The fleet would fight at the solar barrier, hard enough to make the battle look real, hard enough that the Empire would believe it had broken humanity's last real resistance. But behind that fight, a second plan would move quietly. A portion of the fleet, along with key engineers, scientists, and enough supplies to matter, would slip away during the chaos of battle, using the wreckage and confusion as cover, and vanish into unmonitored space before the Empire ever noticed they were gone. It meant sacrificing ships that could have escaped. It meant leaving some crews to fight and die in a battle everyone already knew was lost, so that the retreat behind them would look complete rather than staged. It meant convincing the Empire that every human ship still in the fight had been destroyed, when in truth, dozens had already slipped away in the smoke and wreckage, dark and silent, running on minimal power to avoid detection. Grace Whitfield, then a junior engineer barely 30 years old, had been one of the people Owen chose to save. She still remembered the night before the battle, standing in a cramped cargo bay with 24 other engineers and scientists, listening to Owen explain what was about to happen. "Some of you know people who will be fighting at the barrier tomorrow," he had said. "Some of those people will not come back. I am not going to pretend that is easy to accept. But if we do this right, their sacrifice buys humanity something the Empire will never see coming. Time. Time to disappear. Time to rebuild, somewhere they will never think to look." He had chosen the Ashfall Belt specifically because every Dravith survey ever conducted marked it as dead, worthless, not worth a second look. A field of broken asteroids with no resources, no atmosphere, no reason for anyone to visit. Perfect, precisely because nobody would ever come looking. The battle itself unfolded exactly as painfully as everyone expected. Human ships burned. Crews died defending a line that both sides secretly knew could not be held forever. But behind the smoke and the wreckage, one ship after another slipped free, running dark, engines cold, drifting on momentum alone toward a rally point far outside Dravith patrol routes. By the time the battle ended and the Empire declared victory, they believed they had destroyed the last significant human fleet in existence. They were wrong by several dozen ships, and by every engineer, scientist, and skilled worker Owen had managed to smuggle away in the chaos. For 15 years since that day, those survivors had lived and worked inside the hollowed rock of the Ashfall Belt, hidden behind natural radiation that scrambled most sensor sweeps, building slowly, carefully, using resources scavenged from the very asteroids the Empire had once declared worthless. They studied captured Dravith technology. They tested new weapons. They trained new pilots who had never known any home except the shipyard tunnels. And they waited, patient in a way war rarely allows, for the day they would be ready to be found. That day, Owen had decided, would come on their terms, not the Empire's. And it had begun 3 days ago, with a single signal sent on purpose, on the anniversary of a battle the Empire still did not fully understand. Grand Admiral Corin Voss rarely allowed junior officers to request private meetings, but the report sitting on his desk had been sitting there for 2 days, and each time he tried to dismiss it, some old instinct kept pulling him back to reread it. When Fleet Marshal Ines Dahl requested an audience, he agreed faster than his own aide expected. She arrived precisely on time, carrying a data slate under her arm, her uniform sharp despite the late hour. Voss gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, setting the slate on his desk instead. "You read my report," she said. "It was not a question." "I read it," Voss said. "A signal, gone in under 2 seconds, from a dead sector of space, backed up by a 15-year-old note about unusual gravity readings that nobody bothered to investigate at the time." He leaned back in his chair. "Marshal, I have read 100 reports like this over the years. Ghosts in the data, equipment errors. None of them ever amount to anything." "Then let me send a single scout ship to check," Dahl said. "One ship, a small crew. If I'm wrong, you lose nothing but a few days of fuel and my career, which you are welcome to end afterward." Voss studied her for a long moment. He had built his reputation on caution, on never underestimating an enemy, even one everyone else considered beaten. It was that same caution that had won the war at the solar barrier 15 years earlier, when others in command had wanted to declare victory too soon and pull the fleet back before the human forces were fully broken. Perhaps that same instinct was worth listening to now. "One ship," he said finally. "A short-range scout, minimal crew, strict orders to observe and report only. No engagement, no risk. If there is nothing there, this matter is closed permanently, and you will stop bringing me stories about ghosts." "Understood," Dahl said, allowing herself a small, tight breath of relief. "I would like to lead the scout myself." Voss almost refused. Fleet marshals did not typically fly reconnaissance missions personally, but something about her certainty made him pause, and in the end, he simply nodded. "Take the Haven," he said, naming one of the Empire's smaller, faster scout vessels. "Report back the moment you have anything." "Understood. Understood, Admiral." 3 days later, deep inside the Ashfall Belt, Owen Marsh received word through their limited network of hidden relay drones that a Dravith scout ship had left standard patrol routes and was heading, slowly but directly, toward the belt's outer edge. He called Grace and the shipyard's small command staff together in the same cramped room they had used for planning meetings for 15 years, its walls lined with star charts and hand-drawn diagrams of Dravith ship movements collected over more than a decade of careful, quiet observation. "They're coming," Owen said simply, laying a projection of the scout ship's course across the table. "Faster than I expected, but not faster than we can handle." "One ship," Grace said, studying the projection. "A scout, not a battle fleet." "For now," Owen said. "But once they see what's out here, that will change quickly. We have a choice to make. We can try to hide the shipyard completely, power everything down, and hope they turn back without finding anything. Or we can let them see exactly enough to understand what they're dealing with, and control how that information reaches their command." "You want them to see us," Grace said slowly. "I want them to see us on our terms," Owen said. 15 years of hiding bought us time to build something real. It didn't buy us safety forever. If this is the moment they finally come looking, I would rather they find exactly what we choose to show them, not what they happen to stumble across in the dark. Around the table, the shipyard senior staff exchanged uncertain looks, but none of them argued. They had trusted Owen's judgment through 15 years of careful, patient planning, through failures and small victories, through the slow, grinding work of building a fleet in secret from almost nothing. This decision would be no different. "Prepare the outer defense grid," Owen said. "Quiet, not aggressive. Let them get close enough to see the shipyard clearly before anyone reacts. I want the Empire to understand exactly what waited for them out here, the moment their scout ship reports home." Grace nodded and moved to relay the order. and around the hollow rock that had sheltered humanity's last hidden fleet for 15 long years, the shipyard began, quietly and carefully, to prepare for its first contact with the outside world since the solar barrier fell. The Haven moved slowly through the outer edge of the ashfall belt, its engines throttled down to the barest minimum needed to maintain course. Fleet Marshal Ines Dahl stood at the small bridge's central console, watching debris drift past the viewport, chunks of broken rock tumbling silently in the dark, exactly as every old survey had described. For the first 20 minutes, nothing about the belt looked unusual at all. Just dead rock and radiation, as empty and worthless as the Empire's records claimed. Then the sensors began to flicker. At first, it was small things, faint gravitational distortions that did not match the mass of any nearby asteroid, brief flashes of energy readings that appeared and vanished too quickly to properly analyze. Dahl leaned closer to the console, ordering her small crew to slow the ship further and increase sensor sensitivity. The readings grew stronger the deeper they moved into the belt, clustering around a cluster of unusually large asteroids near the sector's center. "Marshal," her sensor officer said quietly, "I'm reading structures. Solid structures, inside those asteroids. Metal, not rock." Dahl felt a cold weight settle in her stomach, the particular feeling of being right about something she had almost hoped she was wrong about. "Bring us in closer. Slow and careful. I want visual confirmation before we send anything back." The Haven crept forward, and as it rounded the largest of the clustered asteroids, the truth of the ashfall belt revealed itself all at once. Hidden inside a hollowed-out mass of rock larger than any single asteroid had a right to hide, a full shipyard stretched out before them, lit by soft white lights spilling from carved-out docking bays. Half-finished ship hulls hung suspended in construction cradles. Smaller vessels moved between docking points with the unhurried efficiency of a place that had been running the same routines for years. It was not a hidden camp or a handful of survivors scraping by. It was an industrial operation, vast and quiet, and completely unknown to the Empire, built entirely inside a sector everyone believed was dead. "Get this on record," Dahl said, her voice tight. "Everything. Send a compressed burst back to the capital immediately. Full sensor data. Do not wait for my confirmation." Before her crew could finish the order, an alert flashed across the console. Small vessels, sleek and unfamiliar in design, were peeling away from the shipyard's docking bays, moving in a slow, deliberate formation toward the Haven. "They've seen us," the sensor officer said. "They saw us before we saw them," Dahl said grimly, watching the formation adjust course with practiced precision. "Hold position. Do not fire first." The lead vessel from the formation drew close enough for visual contact, close enough for Dahl to see, through the viewport, the unmistakable outline of a human design, sleeker and more advanced than anything the old war records had shown. A voice crackled over an open channel a moment later, calm, controlled, entirely unafraid. "This is Ashfall Command," the voice said. "You are inside protected space. Power down your weapons and hold position, and you will not be harmed." Dahl's crew exchanged uneasy glances. No Dravith ship had spoken to a human voice in 15 years, not since the solar barrier fell silent. And this voice did not sound like a survivor, desperate and beaten. It sounded like someone in complete command of the situation. "This is Dravith Scout Vessel Haven," Dahl said carefully. "We are conducting a routine survey of this sector." "You're conducting reconnaissance," the voice corrected, not unkindly. "And you have found exactly what you were looking for. I would suggest you send your report home quickly, Marshal, before this conversation goes any further." The use of her rank sent a chill through Dahl. They knew who she was. They had likely known she was coming long before the Haven ever crossed into the belt. A tense standoff held for nearly a full minute, the human formation maintaining its slow, patient perimeter around the smaller Dravith ship. Then, without warning, one of the human vessels fired a single, precise shot, not at the Haven itself, but across its bow, close enough to rattle the smaller ship's hull without causing real damage. A clear, deliberate warning. "Full power to engines," Dahl snapped. "We are leaving. Now." The Haven wrenched around, engines flaring, and tore back the way it had come, the human formation making no move to pursue. Dahl gripped the edge of her console as the ship shook, watching the shipyard shrink behind them on the rear display, half in disbelief at what she had just seen. "Confirm the transmission went through," she said, breathless. "Confirmed, Marshal. Full sensor data, sent directly to Fleet Command." Behind them, deep in the hollow rock of the Ashfall Belt, the human formation regrouped calmly around the shipyard, exactly as they had been ordered. Owen Marsh watched the Dravith scout vessel vanish into the dark from a small observation deck, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "They'll have that data back to their capital within the hour," Grace said quietly, standing beside him. "Good," Owen said. "Let them see it. Let them understand exactly what they're facing before they decide what to do next." For the first time in 15 years, the Empire was about to learn the truth, and there would be no taking that knowledge back. Grand Admiral Corin Voss was midway through a formal dinner with several members of the Imperial Council, the last official event of the 15-year anniversary celebrations, when an aide leaned down and whispered a single sentence in his ear that made him set down his glass without finishing his sentence to the counselor beside him. "The Haven has returned. Fleet Marshal Dahl says it cannot wait." Voss excused himself without further explanation, ignoring the curious looks from the council table, and followed his aide out of the banquet hall at a pace just short of running. He found Dahl waiting in a secure briefing room, standing very straight, her uniform still dusted with the faint gray residue of an emergency atmospheric scrub, the kind used when a ship returned faster and harder than its systems were designed for. She did not waste time on greetings. "Admiral, you need to see this," she said, and activated the display. The sensor data from the Haven filled the screen, and Voss felt the easy confidence of 15 years of celebration drain out of him piece by piece as he watched. The hollowed asteroid. The shipyard lit from within. Ship after ship, sleek and advanced, moving with the calm precision of a force that had been training and building for a very long time. And then, worst of all, the recording of the voice that had spoken to Dahl over an open channel, calm and controlled, addressing her by name and rank as though the Empire's entire chain of command was already an open book to them. "This is not possible," Voss said quietly, though even as he said it, he knew it was. He had felt this same cold certainty once before, 15 years ago, in the final hours of the solar barrier, when the human fleet had fought with a desperation that no one facing total annihilation should have been capable of. He remembered wondering, briefly, in the chaos of that battle, why the human losses had seemed almost too convenient, too complete. He had dismissed the thought then, in the relief of victory. He could not dismiss it now. "How many ships, at minimum?" he asked. "Impossible to be certain from a single sensor pass," Dahl said. "But based on the size of the shipyard alone, Admiral, we are looking at a fleet potentially larger than what we destroyed at the solar barrier." Voss said nothing for a long moment, staring at the frozen image of the hidden shipyard on the screen. 15 years of celebration, 15 years of parades and medals and speeches about total victory, and the entire time, hidden inside a sector of space the Empire had dismissed as worthless, humanity had been quietly building the very fleet the Empire believed it had destroyed forever. Before he could give an order, the display flickered, and a new alert overrode the sensor feed entirely. An incoming transmission, broad spectrum, aimed not at a single ship or station, but at every Dravith monitoring post across the region, including the capital itself. Voss felt his jaw tighten as a face appeared on the screen, calm, weathered, unmistakably human, and unmistakably in control. "People of the Dravith Empire," Owen Marsh said, his voice steady, carrying none of the desperation the Empire had spent 15 years believing humanity was capable of. 15 years ago, you celebrated a victory. You believed you destroyed humanity's fleet, broke our resistance, and forced our surrender. I want you to understand something clearly, so there is no confusion about what happens next. We did not surrender. We withdrew, on purpose, at a cost we chose to pay, so that we could rebuild somewhere you would never think to look. Around the capital, in monitoring stations and command centers and quiet living rooms where citizens had gathered to watch the last of the anniversary broadcasts, people froze in place, staring at the unfamiliar human face now filling their screens. "You spent 15 years celebrating an ending," Owen continued. "We spent those same 15 years building a beginning. We are not asking for your surrender. We are simply telling you what is coming, because we believe you deserve the same courtesy you gave Earth 15 years ago, when your fleet arrived at our doorstep without warning. The transmission ended as calmly as it had begun, cutting to silence. In the briefing room, Voss stood very still, the weight of 15 years of quiet certainty collapsing around him. Beside him, Dahl watched his face carefully, waiting for orders that did not immediately come. Far away, in the hollow dark of the Ashfall Belt, the human fleet began, ship by ship, to move. Not in a rush, not in panic, but with the slow, deliberate confidence of a force that had waited 15 patient years for exactly this moment. Owen Marsh stood at the shipyard's central command deck, watching the formation gather outside the asteroid's shadow, Grace beside him, the weight of everything they had built finally beginning to move. "They know now," Grace said quietly. "Yes," Owen said. "Let them wonder what else they got wrong." Behind him, ship after ship slipped free of the Ashfall Belt shadow, engines flaring softly against the dark, beginning a journey 15 years in the making. The Empire had spent a decade and a half celebrating an ending. Humanity, quietly and patiently, had spent that same time preparing a beginning, and now, at last, the two were about to meet again.